Just to let you know, I will sometimes refer to characters with descriptions rather than their names, because I'm very self-conscious about how I butcher their names whenever I try to pronounce them. But to explain, anyone who claims he isn't the biggest simp out there is delusional. He's the embodiment of being a simp, and I say this in the most positive and affectionate way possible. The most devoted believer? Yeah, the simpest of simps. When I was choosing who to draw for this, for a split second I was also considering the blue husband from that other series from the same author, but he had that awkward teenage stage in the past, while this Ghost King was a simp through and through. Again, this is a good thing. If he were to hear this, he would take it as a compliment, like, come on. But for those who don't know, this is from a donghua, which is a Chinese animation called Heaven Official's Blessing. 2 seasons are out already, and the story is based on a Chinese novel series by the same name, which has been translated and published in English as well, and has 8 volumes. Also, it's gay. Or well, boys love category, but with no explicit scenes. So this isn't only about the specific series, but about the boys love and girls love Chinese novels as a whole, because I've read quite a few of them already, and I adore them. I adore the stories, the world building, and the historical and folklore elements of them. To elaborate a little what I mean, for the 10th time already I think. Back in the video for day either 3 or 4, I know I said I'm not a big fan of romance, save for very few exceptions, and that point still stands. Because what I mean by that is that I don't like the stories that revolve around romance. I feel like a part of as to why I'm like this is because I grew up reading books that may not have been fully appropriate for my age as a child, as most people probably do at some point. But I don't mean as in, oh, I was reading like not safe for work manga. I've always been a huge fantasy fan, and when you grow up reading stuff like The Lord of the Rings when you're in primary school, where romance is almost non-existent except for that one part with the wedding at the end with Aragorn, you just turn out like this. And also maybe because I'm ace. Anyway, but even when I would read books more appropriate for my age, or books that had more romance than Tolkien's stories, there was always tendency for which books I would enjoy and which I would not. For example, I remember I enjoyed Eragon when I first read it, and that series has a somewhat romance-related plotline between the main character and another character. It's acknowledged a few times because the main character thinks about it, and the story is, I think, from his perspective, from what I remember. And that plotline isn't completely insignificant to the overall storyline as well, and I still enjoyed all the books in that series. On the other hand, there is a book series like The Hunger Games, which, fun fact, my middle school literature teacher put on our to-read list for the 2nd year, so we all had to read it, but only books 1 and 2, as book 3 was apparently too brutal for kids and could potentially cause problems with the parents, which is bullshit. We had war literature in our reading list, and they were much more brutal, but they were historical and based on facts, so the school and parents were fine with it. Back to my point. Before any Hunger Games fans come for my throat, let me just say that I did enjoy the concept of the world, and I did enjoy books 1 and 2, at least from what I remember, and book 1 probably slightly more than book 2, but it was still a good read for me at the time. I think I was like, I don't know, 13 or 14 at the time. The series isn't by any means bad. My teacher had us read books 1 and 2, and since I don't like dropping things, I just went and read the 3rd one. And I wish I could say I enjoyed it as much as I did with book 1, but I can't. And you know, it's not like it was all about romance in that book, but that plotline was, in my eyes, so prominent throughout it, and so significant for all the decisions the characters were making. It was just a bit too much for my taste. I know it's still a good book, I just would have liked it more without all the romantic undertones. But then again, I'm not sure what else was supposed to glue together some parts if not the romance. Anyway, the way I see it, there are 2 types of romance stories out there. One where the plot is wrapped around the romance, and one where the romance is wrapped around the plot. Getting me to like the latter is fairly easy, but getting me to like the former is much more tricky. Unless there's some sort of a hook that I fall for, the chances of me enjoying a full romance-centered story are fairly slim. But as long as the story and the world building are both strong enough to stand on its own in a hypothetical scenario where you remove the romance from it and replace it by, I don't know, found family or friends or whatever, I can and most likely will enjoy it. It doesn't matter what kind of romance it involves. Heaven Official's Blessing has gay romance in it. 86 and the Apothecary Diaries both have girl and boy romance in it. The Witch from Mercury, the new Gundam, has very blatant Yuri undertones, like the main two leads are engaged, and I love all of them. But that's precisely because, to me, the stories themselves are able to walk on their own, and the romance is like a sprinkling on top. It obviously varies. The Apothecary Diaries have that romance plotline development be very, very slow, which I love, while 86 has a bit more of it. But with 86, the world around the characters is such that it overpowers the romance and even the slight fan service throughout the series, at least for the most part. I don't mind 2 chapters of emotional constipation and blushing and feelings and whatever, when I know the other 10 will be of these same characters fighting for their lives and going through some really traumatic events and getting me to know the whole world and what happened and all of that and the politics. On that note though, volume 7 of 86 was slightly more difficult to read for me, but after 6 volumes of really good storytelling and action, my mental armor was really thick. And that was a really long intro to say. The reason why I like these Chinese novels that Seven Seas have recently been licensing right and left is because they fall into that romance wrapped around the plot type. The aspect ratio of romance to plot is different depending on the story. For example, books by the Heaven Official's Blessing author have more romance in them than, let's say, the Thousand Autumns, because of the nature of how they were set up. And they are all categorized as boys' love, which is a subgenre of romance. I wouldn't be drawing a simp who also happens to be a canonical husband for this prompt if that wasn't the case. But all the books I read so far in this genre have always got me hooked on the plotline and the world building before I even start to enjoy the couples they try to get me invested in. The point where I enjoy reading the glossaries at the end almost as much as I enjoy the actual stories. Especially in the Thousand Autumns, the politics there and the cultural background explanations at the end are really something. I think the best way I can explain my feelings about Heaven Official's Blessing and all the other novels is, if you show me art of the main 2 characters being in love, then yes, I will like it. And if you show me a 3 hours long video explaining the folklore and the history aspects, and not a single mention of these or any other characters, or even a single hint of romance or emotion in the entire 3 hours run, I will also enjoy it. Probably slightly more than the art itself. And this isn't something I can say about every romance-related story out there that I've read or watched in my life, even if I only consider the ones that I did finish, because there's no point talking about the shows I dropped and never picked up again. So for example, in general, I can't say I didn't enjoy watching My Next Life as a Villainess, the one with Katarina, but at the same time, I can't say I did enjoy it. Like, I finished it, and I even watched the 2nd season, but I don't feel any strong emotion towards any single character. I have no need to see ship art of any 2 characters, and I probably wouldn't sit through a 3 hours long essay video about it either. And I'm not gonna pretend there aren't exceptions to this very specific taste I have and just explained, because I did like Kaichou Maid-sama, and if you remove romance from that series, there is very little left of the rest, or rather, the rest of the plot wouldn't make much sense, or straight up wouldn't be possible without the main 2 leads having feelings for each other. And I'm aware of that, but that's where all these Chinese novels come in, because in them, for the most part, the plot would still make sense, because they're historical/fantasy centered stories before they are romance stories. And I love that. Like, kiss and fool around all you want, or confess in the most bizarre situations and ways possible, but give me a reason why I should care not only about you as characters, but also about everything else around you. Which is something many romance stories don't do. They focus on the main couple, which is, fair. It's their story after all. But I'm the type of person who needs to care about the world as well as the characters, or else I'm out. And these novels do exactly that. They give me that reason. I also may be biased because in general I love fantasy and historical settings and martial arts and swords and magic and sci-fi. So in that regard, it's a slight advantage they have over, I don't know, school romance. But simply throwing a romance into these settings doesn't mean I'll like it right away. For example, Raven of the Inner Palace has everything I like, and I do like the storyline of it. But I literally can't bring myself to care for the romance route I guess they were trying to develop for the main two characters. Or Sugar Apple Fairy Tale is a fantasy with a somewhat interesting world building idea of those sugar decorations, and I still don't care about the romance. I really like ReZero, but I do think I would like it much more with all the romance aspects of it removed. And I mean it, all of them. I do like the girls from that series. I do not care about any romance in it whatsoever. I was talking about Attack on Titan in the last video, and I said that, except for the ending, which I hate, I loved it, and I did. But from beginning until the very end, I did not and still do not care in the slightest about Eren and Mikasa thing. I literally couldn't care less. But now that I think about it, I don't think there's any implied / possible slight canon couple in that world that I would care about. So there's also that. All of this to say, if anyone is refusing to read or watch Heaven Official's Blessing because ew, it's gay, they're missing out on a great story and world building that exists all around and between that ew gay stuff. And also my fave is actually Black War.